Good afternoon. Thank you, and welcome to our South Coast Housing Workshop for our local housing elements. We are pleased to bring you this meeting jointly with the cities of Carpinteria, Goleta, Santa Barbara, and the County of Santa Barbara. We also have this event being translated into Spanish, and both the Spanish and the English versions will be rebroadcast for those who are not able to attend today. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Supervisor Doss Williams. Supervisor Williams was elected to represent the 1st District of the Santa Barbara County in June of 2016. Williams previously represented the area along with over half of Santa Barbara County and a quarter of Ventura County in the California State Assembly from 2010 to 2016. Prior to his service in the Assembly, he also served 7 years as a city council person for the city of Santa Barbara and served as a trustee for the Peabody Charter School in Santa Barbara. During his extensive public service, Williams has earned a reputation as a champion for housing for Santa Barbara's workforce and the reduction of greenhouse gases by commuters in the area. Williams holds a master's degree in environmental science and management with a focus on water pollution, planning, and land use law at the UC Santa Barbara Bren School of Environmental Sciences. And with that, please help me welcome Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Jessica. I am really honored with, between these jurisdictions, there's 22 elected officials, so I really am honored that I got to be the one to welcome you here today and talk about what's at stake. It's important to know that we're not the only jurisdictions going through housing element updates. It's happening all across the state, and of course, the heartburn that comes with RHNA numbers and other parts of this process. But I actually think that's the least important thing about today, because I think they're not the reason that we need to build housing. The reason that we need to build housing is because of what kind of community we want to be. First of all, secondly, I also think it's just amazing that we're doing this together cross-jurisdictionally. I really want to thank Jessica for being so instrumental in that, and the Santa Barbara Foundation for being a partner. But it's just, it's something that probably should have been done a long time ago, but seemed totally out of reach. So it's cool that we're doing it together because our destinies are intertwined. So what do I mean by what kind of community we want to be in? As many of you know, I grew up here, and there's not a whole lot of people I went to high school that managed to survive here. A few do, and a few even, I'm in my 40s now. Even in my 40s, there's still some dropping off because that housing keeps on getting more and more out of reach for middle and working class people here. And so I just want us, as part of this process, to look inward at our values, right? And say, what are our values, right? Do we want to live in a community where multiple generations live here, where there is generational continuity of a community? In the last couple of years, there's been a reawakening of consciousness about race which has been amazing for me as a person of color that grew up here and didn't talk about race a lot in politics. It's been wonderful. But I go, what use is all that conversation if we are exiling the diversity that this community has, right? And then I just also think about, because to me, the most powerful value that Santa Barbarans stand for is our environment. And so much of our battles over housing and over growth have been ultimately to try to save the environment. And so I want us to look at that critically at this time. Now that we know that 54% of the emissions in this county are from vehicles. And it is the most out of control portion of our contribution to climate change. As we clean up the grid, as there's more renewables on the grid, as we get better at energy efficiency and green building, thank you very much for those of you in this audience that have contributed to that. I know many people from both sides of the growth wars have helped on many of those. But the portion that is still out of control and growing is because of vehicle miles traveled. So we started these growth battles to save the environment, and it turns out that part of what we created is killing it. Should that not inform our decision-making in the future? How can we stand up for our values truly when the biggest contribution in California to climate change is because we are unwilling to build housing close to jobs? So I am an optimist about the future of this community. I think we can make a difference through this process. I repudiate the defeatism that infects this debate a lot. You know, we all know that we can't solve poverty, but that's never a reason to do nothing about it, right? We can make it more survivable to live here. We won't solve the housing crisis in Santa Barbara, but we can make it better. And we have a responsibility as a community to fight for that next generation, to fight for our diversity, and to fight for the environment. Thank you very much.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dan Clement. I am the Deputy Director of the Long Range Planning Division of the Planning and Development Department for Santa Barbara County. Thank you very much for coming out tonight and spending your time with us. I'm going to bore you for the next 20 minutes with the high-level overview, and then the more competent folks here are going to answer some questions that have been submitted to us already today. So really briefly, we're just going to go over kind of from the high level, why are we in the situation that we currently are in? And that has to do with what Supervisor Williams just describes, and that is the jobs housing imbalance. Then I'm going to very generally go over the housing element in a regional housing needs assessment, or RHNA, process. And then we're going to discuss some of the policy considerations and ways by which we can address the housing needs here in the county and the local jurisdictions. And then finally, we're going to open up to discussion at the end with the folks here on the panel. So, why are we in this situation? Well, as Supervisor Williams stated, we have a severe jobs housing imbalance in this region. And you cannot talk about planning today without talking about what I call the trifecta of planning. You cannot talk about any sort of planning issue without talking about housing, transportation, and climate change. And there's a very sophisticated relationship between these three components, which are reinforcing. It's kind of like a positive feedback cycle. And If you want to address these, unfortunately, you got to kind of take a holistic approach about it. You got to take them all at once, and it makes it very challenging. Also, as mentioned earlier, if you want to address vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, that is, if climate change is of the utmost importance to you, you want to be concerned about this. For those of us who have lived outside the community and commuted in here on a day-to-day basis, you have learned that it's not a very pleasant lifestyle. You spend a lot of hours in the car. I've done it twice. It's interesting. You see the same people in the cars going by. You get to know them driving up. And especially if you're a caregiver, it's really rough because you're separated from the people for whom you have to provide care, and it makes it difficult. And then also, the classic solution to traffic congestion problems, things of that sort, where we would invest in these very expensive transportation infrastructure projects. But the challenge with these projects is that they're very expensive, highly controversial, and they take a hell of a lot of time to actually build and get implemented. Usually by the time it's constructed, there's already a bottleneck in that HOV lane, right? So, and finally, as Supervisor Williams brought up, if you're concerned about white supremacy, if you're concerned about the regional economic and racial segregation that has affected the Tri-Counties region, you want to be concerned about the jobs housing imbalance because that is the structural cause of white supremacy in this region. So, how did we get in this mess? Well, this is a story about a lack of housing production. So many of you know the population growth scenarios that we are expecting to occur to about the mid-century. What you're looking at here are projections from the state, and as we all know, population has been steadily increasing since the 1960s, and it's going to flatten off about mid-century. It's going to probably not go flatten off as late as shown here, given some of the COVID new developments, but overall, this is the general pattern of what we're going to see. For Santa Barbara County, very similar story. However, when it comes to housing production, very different trend line here. What this is showing is data. I don't expect you to see this. By the way, all these presentations will be provided to everybody such that you can see them after the presentation. But the data here starts at about 1960. And then it projects up to 2019. And what this is showing is residential housing production in the state. What's interesting about this graph, I think, is that up into the 1980s, what you see are these typical boom-bust cycles, right? But prior to the 80s, when you'd see a bust, when you see the follow-up boom, you're getting back to close to pre-bust levels. And then here, you actually exceed pre-bust levels. However, from the 80s, roughly, to today, it's a different pattern. What we see are the busts get elongated, and then also the one recovery that we saw during that time didn't even come close to meeting the pre-bust levels. So the result is we are now producing housing levels at about 1960 levels of housing production. So if you don't account for the population increases I showed you in that last slide, if you just take what we need right now, here, no population increase, we'd need about 3 to 4 million new housing units in the state. Big number. So we have a gap between population and housing. We got to narrow that gap. So how do we do it? The state mandates the process through the housing element update and RHNA process. And what this process generally involves is an update to what is we call our housing element, and that's one of the mandatory elements of every local jurisdiction's general plan. A general plan is a mandatory plan that each jurisdiction must adopt. It's called the blueprint for development. It lays out the overall goals and objectives for the community over a longer time period, like 20 years. And it's supposed to specify the elected officials' vision for how we're supposed to achieve planning over that period. So with regard to the housing element in particular, there is an 8-year planning period that we must account for. And there are 3, I'd say, key players in the process. I don't want to give you a whole lot of acronyms tonight. I know us bureaucrats talk in acronyms too often. But there is one department, it's called the State Housing and Community Development Department. We call them State HCD or HCD. And as I'm going to explain in a bit, they're a key player for certifying our housing plans. There's also a regional planning organization called the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, or SBCAG. And as you're going to hear about in a minute, they're important for figuring out how these housing units are distributed throughout the various jurisdictions. And then finally, you have each one of the local jurisdictions. That would be each one of the individual cities, plus the county. And the county is responsible for all the areas located outside of the city's jurisdictions. That would be places like Eastern Gleta Valley, Montecito, and then the Western Carpinteria Valley. So what does this process look like? Well, it starts with SBCAG and HCD. And HCD is responsible for working with SBCAG, and they come up with the regional wide number. That is the number we have to satisfy across the entire Santa Barbara County. The second step involves SBCAG in each one of the local jurisdictions, and what we have to do is divvy up the pie. That is, we take that regional number, and then we have to figure out which one of the jurisdictions is responsible for producing the housing that the state says we have to provide across the entire region. Then we are in where we are currently. That is, we start preparing housing plans to try to show to the state how we intend to plan for, emphasis on plan for, housing over the 8-year period. And then what we do is we each need to submit that plan to state HCD, and that starts an iterative process with them. We go back and forth, and ultimately there will be a certified plan that comes out of it, and then we build all the housing, right? Just simple like that. So what do the numbers look like? For the regional wide number, that is the number that the entire Santa Barbara County must satisfy, it is a big number. We're here in the 6-cycle RHNA. The exact number is 24,856. As you can see, it's bigger than any previous period, and it's over double our last period. So we've got a big number we've got to satisfy. When it comes to the distribution of the housing units, that is taking that regional number, and then now we got to figure out which one of the jurisdictions have to take responsibility for those housing units. SBCAG implemented what was they were calling a two-step process, and all of these are links in this presentation. If you really want to geek out on this stuff, they've got a really great report that explains this in great detail, more numbers than you could ever imagine or ever want to see. But that two-step process that they implemented was generally as follows. So first, what they did is a general north-south split between the counties. This is just a figure from their plan. It consists of the south coast and then all of the north coast generally. And then what they calculated into those considerations were existing jobs and then projected job growth in the county. And then the second step involved new requirements that came into play during this cycle that did not previously exist in previous cycles to address things like social equity. And what they had to factor into were things like overcrowding and cost burden. And then finally, getting back to that trifecta that we started off with, housing, climate change, transportation, the distribution of the housing has to be consistent with another plan that SBCAG is responsible for producing and maintaining. It's called the Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, and that is intended to reduce our vehicle miles traveled and plan for transportation infrastructure over the planning horizon. So how did it divvy up? Well, with regard to the north-south distribution, South Coast got a little under 3/4 of the units, and then the North County jurisdictions received a little bit over 1/4, the most of which went to the Santa Maria Valley area. With regard to the South Coast, City of Santa Barbara received a little over half of the units. Unincorporated County received a little over 1/4, and then Gleta received about 12%, and then CARPINTERIA received 6%. Steve, I'm jealous. Okay, what if we don't satisfy these requirements? What is the big bad state going to do to us? Well, there's a number of potential consequences at their disposal. First off, if you, at the end of that iterative process I described, get to a point where you come up with a plan that state HCD approves, but you don't have, for example, the zoning designations that can accommodate that plan. What state HCD is likely going to do is they're going to adopt the plan, but then say you have 1 year to go ahead and adopt all the rezones that are required to implement that plan. The second point is very important, especially for those who are affordable housing advocates and receive funding via the county and other state institutions, where we have to have a compliant housing element in order to receive a number of really important grant funds on which the county and other, for example, nonprofits rely for their projects. So if we have a non-compliant housing element, we lose our opportunity to receive those grants. Ouch, that one hurts. Third one, of course, with all legislation, there's always a potential for litigation and the consequences. I'm not an attorney, I'm not going to go in detail, nor am I going to pretend to be, but there are things like we could lose our local permitting authority. There could be financial penalties for being non-compliant, or the court could place us a receivership where they basically say, okay, this organization, you run this housing program until the county or the city or whoever is delinquent can get their act together. We do not want that to happen. So how are we going to plan for the housing? Well, a few things. When you're thinking about the various options that are available for the decision makers, there's some basic requirements that you can meet. So first off, we've got a plan for all of the income categories. That's very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income. Excuse me. Surprise, surprise, we always need a lot of low income housing. But the problem's so bad now that we actually need quite a bit of moderate income housing. So we have to plan for that as well. Getting back to compliance with that regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategy, wow, that's a mouthful. We need to prioritize infill development. We want to locate our development in urban areas. That's where we have our existing infrastructure to support it. We don't convert ag lands, open space lands, things of that sort. And then I've been emphasizing we must plan for the housing, because most people don't understand is what the cities and the counties do is we adopt plans to allow for the housing that is needed to satisfy those numbers. But we aren't developers. So we have to rely upon private developers to actually come in and build the housing. So you have to try to incentivize the housing in any way, shape, or form that you can. And there is limited funding, relatively speaking, that comes through the county and governmental agencies that goes directly to developing housing. So that's very important because we're always trying to find new ways to try to incentivize that at all the various income levels. So the policy options that are available is, first, you can upzone your existing residential properties. That is, you allow greater density of development than what's currently allowed. You could rezone non-residential zone properties, such as agricultural properties. And if you're going to do that, what you want to do is you want to identify those properties that are located close to your urbanized areas. You can allow housing in non-residential zones, the classic sort of mixed-use commercial sort of development. And then when it comes to the permitting of new housing, you can reduce the permitting requirements, that is, come up with streamlined approval processes. Or what you could do is relax development standards in sort of a trade-off quid pro quo, whereby you relax, say, parking, landscaping standards, and the trade-off is that you get a greater density of affordable units at certain income categories that are needed for your jurisdiction. There's a number of state laws that aren't mandates, they're options for local jurisdictions that they could go ahead and adopt, which are intended to kickstart housing, which local jurisdictions could pursue. And then if there are any vacant lands that local jurisdictions possess, they could consider leasing those. And then once again, there's always the option for funding affordable housing projects. However, historically, that funding has been rather limited. So with that said, I'm going to stop yapping at you, and I want to turn it over first to the panel, and then ultimately what we want to hear is from all of you tonight. So first off, we want to hear from everyone, particularly those who are historically unrepresented, who don't participate. We're always trying to find new methods for reaching out to them. And if you have any suggestions about how we could do that better, we are all ears, and please let us know. We want to hear from you about those policy options I described earlier, or if perhaps there are other policy options that you can think of that we should consider. And then the third bullet's very important. We want to come up with practical solutions. And if you think about planning, planning is ultimately about trade-offs. You can't have it all, right? So when thinking about the solutions to this, try not to put all your eggs in one basket. So for example, we can't expect accessory dwelling unit development to get us out of this hole. It's just not going to get us there. It's going to help, but it's not going to get us there. So we got to come up with multiple options for addressing this. And then, as always, just be respectful. It's public, and we want to make sure everybody is kind, and we keep this constructive tonight. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Andy Newkirk from the City of Goleta to give you an update on the City of Goleta's housing element update.
And thanks, everyone, for attending. I'm Andy Newkirk. I'm a senior planner at the City of Goleta and co-managing Goleta's housing element update. We got started in the fall and have actually, in the spring, released a draft housing element for public review. We took that document to our Planning Commission at 2 meetings in May, and we'll be presenting it to our City Council next Tuesday, the 28th, at 6 o'clock. That meeting will be a hybrid meeting in person at City Hall and also available on Zoom. And with the Zoom link, we'll provide Spanish interpretation for anyone who needs that as an option. And we'll be seeking from our City Council direction to submit our draft to HCD. Part of that iterative process with the state is they get a 90-day review period to look at our draft before we go through the adoption hearings. So that we're looking to kickstart that 90-day review in the coming weeks. We wanted to highlight just a couple of trends and observations that we've seen so far in our outreach and drafting process. One is kind of a desire by our community to protect natural resources, historical, archaeological resources, et cetera. And that's something Supervisor Williams noted that can often present a tension with approving new development. And also the community's desire to ensure the public engagement through the development review process. In terms of how we've been doing on housing development over the last decade or so, for the 5th housing cycle, which is ending at the end of this year, we are going to meet our RHNA target. It's 900 and something units. We met that pretty early in the housing cycle, but we did not meet our lower income targets. So while we did produce housing, we did fall short, and we will fall short on the income restricted categories. So that's kind of a challenge that even with building housing, we're still seeing. And one of the big changes we'll see is a lot of our housing development that we've seen over the last decade were on vacant parcels, large vacant parcels zoned for multifamily residential. Those projects are getting built, but we won't have that land anymore to plan for future housing development. So we're going to have to look at different ways of housing development in the future. When we talk to developers and property owners, we hear a lot about different constraints for housing. The first one we typically hear is lack of water accessibility, and that is going to be a continuing challenge for Goleta. We are served by the Goleta Water District in almost all of the incorporated city, and there's a lack of access to new water at this time. And then we also identified a need to be more proactive in advocating at the staff level and as a city as a whole, advocating for affordable housing projects, and also ensuring that our existing housing stock is being used for full-time residents. It's hard enough to get new units built, but if we're losing our existing stock, that just exacerbates the problem. So really quickly, I won't go into any detail on these, but we're happy to talk in the breakout session about some of the things we're looking at in the housing element update, but they include more focus on preservation of existing housing stock, focusing more on mixed-use development and redevelopment rather than those vacant residential parcels that we've relied on in the past. Removal of local constraints in our zoning regulations while still adhering to our overall growth vision and our general plan, and increased outreach and collaboration both with other agencies, with the public, and with developers. But happy to go into more detail with anyone who's interested when we start our breakout sessions. And with that, I'll kick it over to Dan Gullett with the City of Santa Barbara for their update.
Great, thanks, Andy. Thanks for being here. Thanks for everyone who arranged this. I think this is an important meeting, and I'm really glad we're able to do it in a time of COVID. I just want to go over briefly the status of City of Santa Barbara's housing element. We're working on the draft right now. We'll have that publicly released the first week of July. As Dan said, the city has 8,001 units to plan for, and that's just to be clear about that number. So that's what the state projection is for the need at the end of our planning period, which is 2031. And the city does have enough sites. We have our suitable sites inventory draft map in the back, and we're happy to talk about individual sites. We have enough sites because we've made some pretty big moves in the past decade at the City of Santa Barbara. We've almost tripled densities in some areas. We've completely removed parking requirements in some areas as well in the downtown core, and reduced open space requirements in some other setbacks, and raised the height limit in some areas too. We also have a lot more capacity because of accessory dwelling units, and this is us complying with state law. We do have very few vacant sites in the city of Santa Barbara. This is an old city, so we're relying on infill and redevelopment of existing sites here. Accessory dwelling units, we can assume 960 accessory dwelling units during this planning period, and that's based on the robust applications and accessory dwelling unit development we've seen here over the past few years. In terms of some programs that are being considered, a new one is a permanent source of funding for housing authority projects to give money that can be leveraged to get a lot more affordable housing here. Also, adaptive reuse. So this is converting non-residential buildings to residential, essentially making that as easy as we can, loosening density requirements, parking requirements, open space requirements to facilitate that. We have in process a project to create objective design standards for multifamily units. This should streamline design review, also provide certainty and predictability in design, and provide for design that is appropriate for the community. We're also looking at doing an affordable housing overlay. The slide says 100% affordable, but we're looking at other percentages and different levels of affordability for that to get more of our affordable units. We've been fairly successful at getting market rate units in the current cycle, and we have been much less successful of getting affordable units, and we do want to see more of those. And the next slide has our timeline. So again, we're working on the draft. So that is going to be released first week of July. We're targeting July 5th. And there's a 30-day review period for the public. We'll have 2 hearings during that period. July 14th will be at the Planning Commission, and then July 26th will be at City Council. August 3rd, all of your comments will be due. And then we will respond to those, adjust the document, and submit to HCD for their review. And they do have that for 3 months. And then in early 2023, we'll be back to Planning Commission and City Council for adoption. And who's next?
All right, that'd be Ms. Steele.
Thank you.
County Santa Barbara.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessie Steele, and I'm one of the project managers for the county's housing element update. I know this slide's a little intimidating with 3 tables on it. I'm just going to really quickly go over it. So the unincorporated county, which is the area outside of the city boundaries, has a total RHNA allocation of 5,664 units, which is shown on the top table here. And that's for the entirety of the unincorporated county. But unlike the other jurisdictions, we have to split up our RHNA by 2 subregions. We have to accommodate a RHNA in the North County and a separate one in the South Coast region. And the county must demonstrate that it has sufficient land to accommodate its RHNA for all income levels within both of these regions. So as you can see from the bottom table here, the South Coast is facing a shortage of land to accommodate its lower and moderate income RHNA. And therefore, the county has to consider several strategies to meet this unmet need. And some of these potential strategies are listed on the next slide. So for purposes of today's meeting, we'd like to hear your feedback on specific strategies to meet our RHNA for the South Coast. And we're specifically looking for feedback on strategies related to planning and zoning. For example, we are considering upzoning residential properties, rezoning agricultural properties that are adjacent to existing urban uses, allowing housing in non-residential areas such as commercial zones, and establishing minimum density requirements. So we have a laptop at our breakout table where we have an ideas wall where you can submit comments, and we'd love to hear your feedback on those strategies. Thank you.
Last but not least, Mr. Goja.
Thank you.
Carpinteria.
Thank you. I am the Community Development Director for the City of Carpinteria. We don't have a housing team. We are smaller, and I appreciate that 901 units is our RHNA target, and that may not sound like a lot to the jurisdictions besides me, but this current RHNA cycle that we are in, we were 164. So that's quite an increase. Carpinteria is surrounded by agriculture on 3 sides and the ocean on the 4th. We don't have a lot of vacant properties to develop for this next cycle, and unlike the other jurisdictions here, we are a little behind. We're all on the same timeline to submit our drafts to HCD, but we are a little bit behind. It actually is a blessing because everything, all of the strategies that we are talking about today, we've considered, but there may be some strategies coming out of this meeting. We have had just one planning commission meeting so far, and that was last month. We will be going back within the next 2 months to give our planning commission and the public our full bag of strategies to meet these numbers. And we will take that away and start working on our drafts. So we're a little bit behind the others, but I think we can use that to our advantage, and during our breakout sessions, it would be great to run some ideas through you all. Thank you.
All right. With that said, we're now going to turn it over to Mr. Pedro Paz to lead the panel discussion.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Pedro Paz. I work for the Santa Barbara Foundation. I have the privilege of working for the Santa Barbara Foundation. I am the Director of Policy and External Affairs for the Foundation, and will be moderating this panel tonight. We at the Santa Barbara Foundation have been working in the area of housing for literally decades, and realized through our work with our partners that this issue cannot be dealt with alone. This is why we are very happy to be partnering with our municipalities and our county to find long-lasting solutions to our housing for our community. I would like to thank everyone for coming out tonight, and especially for those who submitted a question ahead of tonight's event. We received a great number of questions for the event. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to answer all of them, but we encourage you that if you do have a question that you'd like to have answered, that you ask at tonight's, you ask it for tonight's breakout session. So you go to breakouts, and especially if those questions are really specific to a particular municipality or the county. Again, thank you for being here. So tonight we have 8 questions. They're a little broader, and they involve everyone at the table. They'll be able to answer hopefully all of the 8 questions if we can get to them all. So with that, I'm going to start off with the first question, which is, how can we engage developers, city, county, and staff planners, and our leaders for a better understanding of the obstacles / barriers to the realization of workforce middle-income housing? I know we have a couple of people that can answer that question. I'll call on CARPINTERIA first.
Sure. Thank you. We can do what we're doing tonight, meeting as a whole region, a group. This is the start. And we also, some of you, I see a lot of familiar faces, but all of us sit or have representatives on a joint cities-county affordable housing task group. We meet quarterly, and it's just like this, talk about issues. We share success stories, we talk about projects coming up, and we look at strategies. So this is an open public meeting, and we can provide more information about that meeting. We also, all of our jurisdictions are required to provide the state with annual housing element reports and annual reports on homelessness. All of these are public meetings that are noticed, and the public is welcome to these meetings. It's basically getting the word out, getting people educated where they can find out more information. And with social media, speaking for the city of Carpinteria, we just, over the last year and a half, have a social media person that will promote Carpinteria and these sort of issues. We have web pages. We also just started a hot button. If you go to the City of Carpinteria's homepage, you'll see a hot topics, and there is a button that is housing element update, and that will put all of our efforts. You can feel free to call us. Because we are small, we are reachable, and we'll return phone calls and speak with you if you have questions. I think that's the main way for us getting the developers and the public involved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move to the county and see if the county has something for us.
Sure. At the county, we recognize that one of the challenges to providing moderate and workforce housing is zoning appropriately to accommodate that kind of housing. So we are considering a variety of different strategies to do this, and we are welcoming public input on all of them. One of the things we're thinking about doing is providing for greater density. 20 units per acre may not do it anymore. We need to consider rezoning properties at a higher density. We also are considering creating housing element programs that incentivize various housing types that are available to moderate incomes and workforce housing. And we'd also like to consider updating our inclusionary housing ordinance and our in-lieu fees. It's been a long time since that document was touched, and I think it's time that we update it. And the public can get involved with us in a variety of ways to provide input, including attending meetings like this, emailing, calling, commenting on our draft housing element when it's released, in a variety of other ways.
Thank you. Does either the City of Santa Barbara or Goleta want to comment? All right, we'll jump to the next question. Beyond this event, how are you going to get input from renters and young workers who are not able to live here? That's a big question, because we have a lot of, as everyone knows, a lot of commuters. The pandemic did a little bit of sort of a turn on commuters, but we still have a lot of people that live outside of the area in Ventura County, northern Santa Barbara County. So that's a great question. Carpinteria.
Thank you. For this, again, relying or knowing that Carpinteria is small, getting the word out to the workers. I've personally gone to the HR representatives of some of our larger employers. We do have a number of them in Carpinteria. It's not quite as much because of the COVID. People are working at home, but I'll actually go to speak with the HR people, show them that we have other programs, such as, I believe all the jurisdictions here have the home buyer workforce housing It's through the Housing Trust Fund. It's a workforce housing down payment program where we will loan money to people to help them with their first purchase. And this has been very successful. We've run it for several years, but that word has to get out through the social media, and for Carpinteria, just hitting the streets and talking to the employers who have workers in Carpinteria. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to answer that question? Go ahead.
I would just like to say that this population of people, young workers and renters who are not able to live in Santa Barbara County but want to, they are hard for us to reach. A lot of our housing element public outreach is targeted toward people who already work here, live here. But we would like to hear your feedback on how maybe we could reach those populations.
Thank you. We'll move to the next question. How is your jurisdiction responding to state mandates? We saw that earlier in the slides, a lot of mandates and a lot of numbers. We'll start off with City of Santa Barbara.
I'd say that's evolved over time. I think there was some reluctance when the first accessory dwelling unit laws came into place. We had policy that kind of laid out a process. We didn't really expect granny units or secondary dwelling units to actually move into ordinance, but this is something that the state did and got us a lot of really good housing, and I think it's now embraced, and we're looking to streamline it further and make it easier. Yeah, the state mandates are hard. We don't really know what to expect in October, and some things get passed and they say, hey, what's on the books in January is null and void, and then we're kind of scrambling to put things together, urgency ordinances. So it does take a lot of effort, staff time, community time, city council time, planning commission time, but we comply. We know our place.
Thank you. City of Goleta?
Yeah, our experience is pretty similar. I think 2 out of the last 3 Januaries, we've done urgency ordinances to address changes in state law. So we really, in late fall and winter, we have to be really nimble to see what came out of Sacramento at the end of the legislative session. And as Dan mentioned, you know, we have to comply. By the time these laws get adopted and it gets into the planner's hands, our job is just to implement them. But we do try to do as much as we can, explaining the rationale for the changes in the law, and also highlighting where local jurisdictions still have control. With SB 9, with the ADU regulations, there's still some local control. You have to look in the fine print, but it's there. And local ordinances can get adopted with certain little caveats to address local desire. So we try to do as much as we can to incorporate those areas where we're allowed under the law to have local discretion in terms of the standards, but really just being nimble in getting those laws in the books, or at least educating, you know, all of our staff and those who are inquiring about what their rights are under the state law. Even things like density bonus law changes every year, and it's actually a really powerful tool for applicants. And so that's something that moving forward, we think we're gonna really emphasize more, because if someone meets our inclusionary requirement for housing, which is on the higher end for, I think, the jurisdictions up here right now, you get pretty close to qualifying for density bonus just by meeting our inclusionary requirement. So that with a few more income restricted units, you may then get to qualify for density bonus, which really opens a lot of flexibility for the development.
Thank you. City of Carpinteria?
Similar to my colleagues here, the maybe something interesting for the audience here. The city of Carpinteria is completely within the coastal zone. We have no inland zoning areas. So a lot of these laws, the ADU, accessory dwelling units, and junior accessory dwelling unit laws have specific carve-outs that they need to also be consistent with the Coastal Act. And because of this, all of the laws that we need to create in response to the state also need to be approved by the Coastal Commission. And there's a balancing sometimes between coastal priorities and housing laws put down from the state. The Coastal Commission has put out at least 2 papers to cities or jurisdictions on to how to do this balancing, but there's no direct line saying this is how you do it. So it does take a little longer for cities or for all of us for the areas within the coastal zone, but that is part of the process going forward.
Thank you. And the county?
The county has been doing a lot recently to keep up with and comply with state mandates. The county received a grant to update its zoning ordinances to comply with several state laws, including those related to ADUs, state density bonus law, the Housing Accountability Act, and others. The county is currently implementing state law with regard to SB 9. We do not have our own ordinance at this time, but it's something that could be considered for the future. Same with SB 10. It's an ordinance that jurisdictions can choose to adopt if they wish to. It's not on our docket right now, but our Board of Supervisors might decide to take that on in the future. And then the county is also considering in general just a new ministerial permit process to streamline the process for various types of housing, including those that are typically included in state mandates.
Thank you. Next question is, how is success defined for the housing element update? What metrics are used? As many of you noted or saw in the PowerPoint presentation, there are a number of the jurisdictions weren't able to meet all of the RHNA numbers. And so this is along those same lines. What happens and how is success defined? So we'll start with the county.
Well, state HCD, again, generally measures success by progress toward our prorated share of our RHNA. And it accounts for every income level. And within the previous housing cycle, the county met most of its RHNA, but we fell short on the lower income. And for this next cycle, we have a RHNA that is almost 10 times larger. It's really daunting. So this is going to require the county to implement housing element programs that are going to incentivize and really accelerate housing production and streamline it. And the county is going to track its progress in implementing those housing element programs every year within its annual progress report that is sent to the state on April 1st.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would add one of the housing element will include a lot of quantified objectives. So, one that's pretty obvious is meeting our RHNA target. But there'll be other quantified objectives as well, one of which that we include is preservation of existing affordable housing stock. Typically with an inclusionary policy driven project where you have to have a certain amount of your project be income restricted, there's a term for that inclusionary unit, often 55 years, which sounds like a long time, but that means that really everywhere in the county, you'll have affordable housing that can go to market rate, in a certain year. And so one of our targets is to preserve all units at risk of conversion to market rate. That's challenging because it can be expensive, and we don't have the leverage of a new development to condition at that point. But that's one of the targets that we've included is to preserve those units when they are at risk of conversion. And I'll also note, Steve mentioned this, but we do have these annual progress reports that we have to prepare, so the public can track our progress every single year. They're due to the state March 1st, I believe, of each year, so it tracks the previous calendar year. And so we will report on our progress towards meeting all of these objectives every year during the housing element cycle, and the public is free to review those as we prepare them and to see how we are doing towards meeting those targets.
City of Santa Barbara.
Yes, city staff is going to start going to city council at the beginning of every year and going through where we should be with our housing element and where we are and what programs we're doing and when. So there's the RHNA. Our RHNA is about double of what it was last time. And the current RHNA, we're developing about half. So we had 4,000. We're building at a rate to get to about 2,000 in that 8 years, and then the next is 8,000. So the sobering number is at the current rate of building, it'd be about 42 years to get to the 8,000 units. So we're looking to make it clearer, easier, and facilitate that development, especially the affordable housing, better than we have been.
Thank you. One of the things that everyone realizes living in Santa Barbara is that we do have a sizable senior population. And so the next question asks, how will the housing element address the increasing need for accessible and affordable housing for older adults and people with disabilities? CARPINTERIA?
Sure, thank you. This is one of the questions I thought would be great. If any of you have some good ideas, come and see me in our breakout session. But, you know, in Carpinteria, we do have an affordable inclusionary for sale units. We can apply that through this next housing element and the follow-up implementation with our zoning code to have this same inclusionary requirement for apartments and even assisted living. Many of you probably know that assisted living, the much smaller units, do count towards the RHNA numbers. And like all of our jurisdictions, Carpinteria is growing older. We have one assisted living project that was a very big success. COVID had slowed it down, but they've been approved for a whole second unit or a whole second phase with just as many units. So applying that idea to inclusionary for both apartments and for the assisted living is one way to make sure that we can target the people with disabilities and the elderly. Carpinteria also uses, while we haven't adopted the state's accessory dwelling unit programs yet, we do have a second unit ordinance that's been in effect for years. And a number of people who have used the ordinance have also used it in addition to, we have a reasonable accommodations. So where if say a lot isn't big enough for an accessory dwelling unit, someone with a disability in their family may want to put in a second dwelling unit for a family member. And we've seen this work where we relax the standards of the lot size or the closeness of the buildings. We can do that, and we've seen that work in Carpinteria.
Thank you. What about the county?
Well, the county's housing element is going to contain a whole chapter that is dedicated to our housing assessment, which will analyze the housing needs of many different populations, including persons with disabilities and seniors. The county's also been in contact with certain stakeholder groups, for example, the Adult and Aging Network. And we were trying to share data, understand housing needs, and eventually, when our draft housing element is ready, solicit feedback on that housing assessment and other programs that would incentivize the development of housing that's affordable to those groups. And we'd also love to hear from any other groups and individuals who have suggestions as well.
Thank you. Any others? Any other comments?
We have a land use called residential care facilities, which is kind of this umbrella category, residential uses that have on-site assistance. So senior living facilities would fall under that. Under state law, small residential care facilities have to be permitted like any other residential use, so no kind of conditional use permits, extra processing. The state has, in other jurisdictions where they've reviewed housing elements, has really pushed for greater flexibility for large residential care facilities, which is 7 or more residents. So that's something we've looked at in our housing element, is reducing the permit requirements for those large residential care facilities to provide greater flexibility in citing those types of uses.
Thank you. Next question is, how does the housing element update address resource issue challenges such as water? And we all are facing the big elephant in the room about water and water usage. So we'll go to the city of Santa Barbara.
Great. Thank you. We are doing a program environmental impact report for our housing element update. So we will be looking at things such as water availability, wastewater, solid waste. We also had the opportunity, and we're taking it, because the climate action plan is being updated at the same time. So the climate action plan and the housing element are being analyzed together in that program EIR. So we can look at trade-offs, benefits of vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, we've included a program to work with the water district as best we can to seek any type of resolution for lack of water access. That'll be a huge challenge for us moving forward until it rains a lot and snows a lot. So, but we included a program where we'll proactively try to do what we can to move that along. And in terms of natural resources in the city, as I mentioned earlier, there's a huge desire in our community to protect our environmentally sensitive habitats. So this is a little more nuanced, but one of the changes in regulations that we're looking to include is changing how we measure density on projects. So we currently use a net developable lot area to calculate density. What that basically means is you don't count the area of the lot that has resources on it. So if you have a 2-acre lot and there's an acre of environmentally sensitive resources, you can count your density for a project only on that single acre. So if you have 20 units per acre, you could only have 20 units for the whole project, even though it's 2 acres. So one of the reforms we have proposed in our draft is to go back to a gross lot area. Doesn't mean you could develop in the resource areas, but you could have greater density on the developable portion of the lot, because when we looked at our sites inventory, quite a few sites had environmentally sensitive habitat, and we had to cut out that area of those lots when looking at what type of density we could project for those sites.
Great. Anyone else? Carpinteria County? Okay. The last question we have is, how do we build community support for new housing? I know that's a big, huge question for everyone in the room, given that we have a lot of folks who can be divided on the issue of housing and new housing. So we'll start off with the City of Carpinteria.
Again, I'm sounding like I'm banging the same drum, but the City of Carpinteria is small. Pretty much everyone knows everyone in the community. And we've seen it with other projects work where you have the champions of the whole area who are for progressing housing, or progressing housing that may be a little more dense than what people are used to. Our plan is to actually go out in the neighborhoods and get individual champions within each neighborhood to get the word out. We've seen so much, both good and unfortunately bad, on social media. Nextdoor is a prime example. But through Nextdoor, you see there are people who are constantly pushing information out. Some of it is very good information. And we're going to be looking for champions to take over neighborhoods and to help get their neighbors alongside. You know, it's one thing hearing from a politician or someone who is not from even the community, but to hear it from the community is what we believe the way to start small and get the ball rolling that way.
Thank you. The county?
Well, for the county's part, what we know we can do is to educate the public and decision makers as best we possibly can. We know that we need to present the facts and be very transparent about what our housing need is and the constraints that we're facing. And what the public can do for us on the other side of the table is to take part in the public outreach process as much as possible. Your input truly is very valuable. We want you to come to our meetings, email us and call us, submit comments on our EIR and our housing element, and then come to the public hearings as well as the draft works its way through the decision maker hearings, and then when we get to adoption at the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you. City of Santa Barbara?
Yeah, I think our main problem is so many people love this place and they want to move here, so that's more housing, and they're afraid it's going to lose its character. And I think we need to have a better conversation about that, because we have a lot of protected buildings, structures of merit, landmarks that can't be touched, that will be there for a long, long time. And I do think we need to embrace and celebrate new development and make it clear that this is what the community wants. And part of that, some of us staff have been talking about being out there with social media, maybe having some produced video with developers, development team, talking about their projects and what kind of units are in the projects, and just having that available so people know what's happening in the hole in the ground next door.
Thank you. I think it's one of the reasons that the Santa Barbara Foundation is here as well, is that we want to partner with our municipalities and facilitate the process and get the word out and be a partner in that education and that outreach to our community, because it is our community. We serve the entire county. It's important for us to be here and lend a hand to the effort. I think we have the opportunity to answer a question from the audience, so we'll go ahead and do that. I saw the first hand raised is this lady right here in the red right here. Go ahead and stand up. Thank you.
So, been in the housing issue community, know many of you. Love this area, of course. I'm currently a commissioner on the County Housing Authority. One of my long-held beliefs is that if you upzone land, you're increasing the cost of land. So it's a pet peeve of mine to hear you talk about meeting RHNA numbers on paper with upzoning land. I just would like you to address that.
Anyone want to answer that?
I can take a stab at it first. So the county is, of course, considering upzoning as just one of our many strategies to accommodate our RHNA, but I do want to be clear that we're considering many other strategies as well. For example, we know that just upzoning isn't going to incentivize developers enough. We also need to cut down the amount of time that it takes for a developer to push a project through. It's costly and expensive, so we're considering streamlining the permit process for various types of housing. You know, maybe not as much as what we did for ADUs, maybe as much. It depends on, the type of housing and the affordability level. We're also, considering taking a look at our inclusionary housing ordinance and updating some of those outdated provisions, considering allowing housing in zones where it's not currently allowed. Encouraging mixed use, for example, in certain areas could be a really valuable strategy. So while upzoning is just one component, it is not the only component that we're considering to meet our RHNA.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, so the city of Santa Barbara doesn't need to upzone as part of this. We are proposing some small down zones and up zones that more or less balance each other out through hearings. We've talked about these these up zones and down zones with City Council previously. Our suitable sites inventory, we're looking at parcels that can develop with 10 units or more and that have economic potential as well. We're not looking at anything that has recently developed commercial buildings, so we're looking at assessor data on the improvements, the building improvements, and the land value as part of this. That's current.
Thank you. City of Carpinteria.
Thank you. I was just going to add that the upzoning alone really doesn't work. We've seen that. We have dense development in Carpinteria, and it's not, and they've even taken advantage of the density provisions, and what we find that you would have to do the upzoning or even leave current zoning, say 20 units per acre, but there has to be a reduction in other requirements, parking. You know, when you've got a lot of your land that is taken up by parking or open space or protections of resources, not that we would allow the resources to not be protected, but especially the parking requirements and the requirements for landscaping, open space, something has to give somewhere, and you upzoning without some of these other lessening of the requirements really doesn't work.
Thank you.
I would just add, you know, one challenge with meeting the state housing obligations is RHNA, in part, is a math game where you have to have certain densities to meet your overall numbers. So that is a challenge that we face. There may be consequences for the decisions in terms of land value, but there is that challenge that we do have to meet these numbers, and you have to have, especially on vacant land, you're going to want a certain density to be counted in a certain way under the state metrics. So that creates a challenge for us when we're, you know, filling out those tables and counting number of units per site. So I just wanted to highlight that as a challenge we face in this process.
All right, I think we can transition now to our breakouts. So you have the opportunity, if you have a burning question you didn't get answered, we apologize, but you do have an opportunity in the breakouts to answer that question. So I'm going to go ahead and transition back to Jessica.
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you to our panelists.